Good morning or afternoon. It's almost noon on Wednesday, October 23, 2019 in Altoona, Iowa, just outside of Des Moines. The hotel where I'm staying has offered me a conference room for making these videos, and I appreciate it. And so do you, probably, because you don't have to look at my hotel room in the background. As hoped, I attended political meetings Monday night in Ames, Iowa for Elizabeth Warren, and Tuesday night in Iowa City, Iowa for Kamala Harris. One of the reasons I'm making these videos is to give you a sense of what it's like to be there. I went there as a voter and can give you an idea of what it was like. Where it's appropriate, I'll throw in some comparisons with Mayor Pete's town hall the weekend before, just to illustrate the differences. Driving to Ames from Des Moines was easy. It was 40 miles in 40 minutes. However, it was raining cats and dogs. And I decided on the drive that if parking wasn't convenient, I was just going to skip it. And this is from a man who'd gone door to door 3 out of 5 days for Senator Bennett within the previous 2 weeks. The parking could not have been more convenient. I think it's Stevens Auditorium has a large parking lot right next door. That's because it's in a complex which I think includes the football field and some athletic fields. So anyway, parking was just not an issue. They had volunteers standing out front saying no bags and no purses, which I believe meant no backpacks and no purses. And I was happy to have that warning, as I'm sure all the women in attendance were. I was wearing a raincoat because it was raining, and I stuck my vlogging camera in one pocket and a tripod and a microphone in the other pocket. And not to be creepy, but frankly, those are the size of a revolver or a pistol, and they could have been taken into the auditorium easily. There was no metal screening. There was no, as far as I could tell, no Secret Service. There were security policemen around, but you would expect that with a crowd of 3,000 or 4,000 people. As I approached, there was a Trump demonstration right outside the door that had at most a dozen people. I filmed them, which they liked, so I won't ever do that again. Before I could go in the door, they told me I had to fill out a security form, and it asked for my name, address, cell phone, email address, and whatnot, and I said, security? And they said, oh, well, we use this for contact too. And I said, is it for Elizabeth Warren's mailing list, or is it for security? And the nice volunteer, who was a man my age, said both. Well, that's hogwash. They wanted my contact information. I put down my name and my phone number, and I gave them the right phone number, and I'll let you know how often they contact me by text or otherwise. But I think they should have just said, we want your name for follow-up. I went inside, and I was not there right when it opened, but I wasn't that late. I was there at least 45 minutes before the speech started, and the auditorium was quite full. The lower seating section, which held more than 1,000 people, was full, and behind me, it essentially filled up to maybe 80% of total capacity, which again, I would estimate at 3,000 to 4,000 people. The event was theater. It was good. It was like going to a good play. There was a large American flag as a backdrop, and I was reminded of the movie Patton. Elizabeth Warren was a good speaker. She was animated. I'm a fan, so I've already read her books and I'm familiar with her story, but it was nice to hear her explain it in person. The crowd was loud and enthusiastic, and it's just fun to be caught up in that kind of energy. She spoke for a long time. Her stump speech, which I'll try to put up on YouTube in several parts, was 38 minutes long, and then she answered about 20 minutes worth of questions. There were only 3 questions, and they were quite democratic in how they selected the people to ask questions. As you went in, you were offered the chance to take a little ticket stub like you would for a raffle or something. They put all that in a big jug or bowl, and they picked 3 numbers at random, and those are the 3 people who asked a question. I did not find any of the questions well, the questions weren't that bad, but she didn't really answer them. She didn't dodge them. It's just I felt like I was hearing more of her stump speech as opposed to any specific issue in particular. So I'm not going to put up a video on her questions and answers. An interesting thing she did was say that anyone who wanted a selfie with her after the speech, she would stay as long as needed. And I took a shot as I left of the line of people seeking a selfie. I would guess it was no more than 10% of the audience, and probably more likely it was 5% of the audience. In retrospect, it wouldn't have killed me to go get a selfie with Elizabeth Warren. I'm 6'4", she's tiny in comparison, but I'm a fan. She's a nice woman, and it would have been an interesting selfie to have. For Kamala Harris, I had to drive 95 minutes each way to Iowa City. I was again concerned about convenience, and I need not have been. We went to the Carver Arena, one room in it. There was lots of parking. It was free. They had a volunteer out front pointing us in the correct direction of where to park. I did stop and ask him where to park, and he just said anywhere. When I walked in, I was presented with a form asking for my contact information. There was no pretend security part of it. There were no restrictions on purses or backpacks. I told them I'd already RSVP'd for the event, which was totally unnecessary as far as I can see. And they said fine. And I was balking a little bit at filling out the form, and the woman said, you don't even really need to fill it out. But I did the same thing. I put down my name and my cell phone number. After I had RSVP'd that afternoon, I had received several texts from the Harris campaign, including one asking me to join their Facebook group. I'm not a big Facebook fan. I didn't join their Facebook group, but they followed up immediately from the RSVP form with contact. The speech by Kamala Harris started on time. She spoke shorter, but still long. She spoke 30 minutes. And by way of contrast, Mayor Pete spoke for 12 minutes. Now, he was outdoors, and it was cold. It wasn't terribly cold yet, but it was cold. And that might have been a reason he was more brief. They all had about the same length of questions and answers. I would put them at 20 minutes plus. That's Mayor Pete, Elizabeth Warren, and Kamala Harris. And their handlers, or whoever was in charge, seemed to close them all down at under an hour. And I know that figure because the battery on my vlogging camera lasts an hour, at which point it quits. That happened to me in Senator Bennett's meet and greet, but only by a couple of minutes. So it seems to be that the campaign handlers are looking for an hour maximum. I think they're using a 1 hour figure either to save the candidate's voice or energy, or because they know that the voters really have enough after an hour. Kamala Harris's questions and answers were, I hate to say more democratic, they were just, stand up and they'll give you a microphone and you ask a question. There was a marvelous question from a woman who was a classmate in college of Representative Elijah Cummings, who had just died. And she asked a very heartfelt question of Kamala Harris, which appeared to me to form an immediate connection between the senator and the questioner. And it was nice to see the kind of protective shell that Senator Harris has about her melt away, and to see her respond really emotionally to the question that was being asked. That was the highlight of the question and answer for me. I put that question and answer up as a video immediately that night as soon as I got back to my hotel room. And then the next day I put up a short Q&A video that only had two questions, one on immigration, one on healthcare. I'll put up the stump speech for Senator Harris as well. I enjoyed all three speeches. Of the three, frankly, they were all very high quality. Mayor Pete is sort of a rock star when it comes to speaking. Elizabeth Warren was a better and more effective speaker than I expected her to be. And like I say, the setting, the crowd, that was good theater. It was entertaining, it was fun, it was uplifting. Senator Harris was in a smaller venue and thus could not soar as high, but she did soar when she was answering the question about Representative Cummings. And she came across also as being genuinely nice. She thanked each questioner for their question, and she meant it. And she had a question from a young girl, which I edited out, but she was parental with respect to this young girl and uplifting. This is neither here nor there, but the introductions to these folks were actually similar. I disliked Mayor Pete's introduction the most. A nice woman volunteer gave the introduction. What troubled me is that she decided that her breakthrough moment in terms of supporting Senator Pete was when she saw him at the Iowa State Fair go up to a veteran and shake the veteran's hand and say, "Thank you for your service." Well, I don't view that as an earth-shaking moment or event, and I was startled that she had such an emotional reaction to it. Two young women spoke in front of Senator Warren and also in front of Senator Harris. They were nice. At the University of Iowa, one or both were university students. One of the two for each senator was an immigrant. And I think they were just kind of filling some time. I don't mean to draw a negative analogy, but it's kind of like watching commercials before a movie starts. It's beats sitting there quietly, but not by a whole lot. In terms of what the viewer gets out of this, I think it is a different experience to be in the room with the candidates who are either speaking as long as they want to, as opposed to when a debate moderator cuts them off, rudely or not. And it's interesting to see them speak on their feet. I was not impressed with Elizabeth Warren's agility when it came to answering the questions she was asked. I think she just sort of fed into canned speeches or canned phrases. She had two questions about agriculture, and she did use the word farmer in answering them, but mostly it was policy wonk stuff. Kamala Harris, to me, was more adept, more extemporaneous. I think she's a very heartfelt woman who has a little trouble communicating that through the shell that surrounds her. That shell dissolved with the Representative Cummings question, and I began to see it melt away, or to see it for what it is, when she was answering the other questions. I think it's highly worthwhile for voters to attend these functions. I think they get strike the word much, they get a different perspective, a different impression of these candidates in person, particularly in these early days, than they do watching a video on YouTube, watching a national debate on television. The Iowa caucuses are 100 days away this weekend, a couple of days from now. So there's plenty of time. And I heard about a poll. I don't do national media particularly. And I saw an interview with Mayor Pete where he referenced, I think, the same poll that says that 90% of Iowa Democrats are undecided at this point. Given the track record of Iowa Democrats, that's important, because the winner of the Democratic caucus in Iowa has been the Democratic nominee for president every year since the year 2000. Lastly, I sat in or near the press section because I was videotaping, and it was sort of in the center back of the room. I had no discussions with anyone at the Elizabeth Warren event. There were elaborate cameras there. Whether they were hers or network cameras, I don't know. Given the size of the crowd, it was entirely appropriate to have that quality of media present. At the Harris event, there were fewer and smaller cameras, and I sat next to a guy who was 30, 32, 35, who was clearly a reporter, so I asked him who he was a reporter for. And he was a reporter for a Dutch newspaper. We chatted a bit, and we'd both been at the Warren event the night before. He made a comment that was interesting. He said he didn't understand why Iowa was given such a prominent role in the selection process. The way he phrased it is, why is Iowa first? I don't understand this. And I answered briefly by saying I was glad Iowa was first. I said I preferred Iowa to New York or California, which are liberal states and won't necessarily bring along much, if any, of the rest of the country. And I pointed out to him what he already knew, I'm sure, which is that the record of the Iowa Democratic caucuses in picking the eventual Democratic nominee is unmatched from the year 2000 onward. I'll have more to say on the media, but this has gone on long enough. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy my perspective or the "you are there" touches that I'm trying to bring to my videos, please subscribe. A thumbs up is always welcome if you know how to do that.